When did your gut feeling of something's not right here save you? I woke up at 3 AM once sitting upright in bed. I felt on alert and my heart raced when I saw that my cat was on alert too. Wide awake by my feet with his ears perked up. But I didn't see or hear anything weird. Something didn't feel right and I couldn't relax. So I got up and went to the kitchen. Turned on some lights and ate food even though I wasn't that hungry. Eventually went back to bed. We discovered the next morning that someone had stopped while in the process of using some kind of tool to silently cut a big hole in the glass window in the living room. They were trying to break in. Right next to the bedroom. I think the lights I turned on scared them away. Edited to add that we had 3 long years of issues with our neighbors. They repeatedly came into our property and were pissed that we put up a 9-foot fence to keep them out. This attempted break-in happened right after the fence went up and 2 days before they all moved out. Glad those pieces of shit are long gone. Was riding my motorcycle with a friend on the back. We were going down a country road behind a truck hauling a bunch of old car tires when all of a sudden I decided we shouldn't be there. So I slowed way down to let the truck go ahead of us. Just as I did, one of the tires fell off the truck and landed right where we would have been. Well, I was walking home. Wasn't late and I'm from a pretty safe area, but it was that time of year when it starts to get dark really early, so felt kind of ominous. Anyway. I pass this guy in a red sweater and red tracksuit bottoms and he looks at me funny. Maybe he's high. Maybe he's drunk. Either way, something not quite right about him. I keep going. Look behind me. He's still there. Cross the road. He crosses with me. As soon as I turn a corner, I sprint to my apartment complex and run into the coded gate and wait. He rocks up a minute later and stares at me through the gate. He just stares at me for a good 10 or so seconds, then runs back the way he came. Shivers. I'm a firefighter. We got called out to a tree fire started by fallen power lines. We pull up in the truck and I'm trusting that my driver and crew leader are doing their job and have good situational awareness. We get out of the truck and we park next to a set of power lines, not fallen. It's a very windy night and I can see the lines swinging, so I voice my concerns to my crew leader, who says it'll be fine. We get out, hose out. Risk of the tree fire catching onto a house outweighing potential risk of arcing, plus the line disconnected when it fell, and I'm on the branch ready to start putting it out with 2 others near me when I get to chill. I look up, see the lines swinging violently and yell, "Everyone f***ing move." As the 3 of us sprint and dive out of the way, we hear a thwip and crack, and sure enough the line we were under came loose and stayed connected to the power pole. If I hadn't got that chill, chances are we would have had 3 fried fireys. Had a friend who said we should go to this party he was invited to by a classmate of his. We ended driving out to it. We noticed the neighborhood was not too pleasant and sketchy. We saw that house had some lights on in backyard but kind of quiet for a party. I decided that we should not go since something felt really off. Friend ended finding the classmate that invited him got robbed and threatened when he went to party. It ended up being a fake party. How is this a good plan? Let's invite people to our house to rob them. Nobody will ever catch us. Went to a college party and one of the guys made me feel very uncomfortable. He didn't ever do anything to me. But something seemed off. I kept dumping my shots because getting smashed seemed like a bad idea. I ended up taking a friend and leaving while he told us that we were being lame by not having more of the Grey Goose. He arped another girl at the party that night. Worked as a shot girl at a pub. One night I rejected someone who attempted to get my number. Not unusual, and he didn't seem that bothered. The whole exchange wasn't strange to me. In the early hours after the bar closed, I went to leave through the back door into the car park like usual when I saw the sensor light outside was on. Someone was stood just outside the door. I felt uneasy, so went out the front and asked one of the bouncers to walk me round the back to my car. As we rounded the corner, we spotted this guy lurking outside the door holding his belt like a makeshift garrote. When he saw us, he started screaming that I was a f***ing bitch and I should die. He scampered off into the road and never came back. A guy dyed blue came into the motel lobby at 1 AM. In and of itself. Not terribly unusual. clubs get out. You see folks with body paint, foam, etc. But he just seemed off. Full stop. When he came up to the counter I took a step back. Which is why his Bowie knife hit my thigh and not my neck. Slammed the fire door down. Called the cops. Wasn't difficult for them to find a bright blue guy who got naked for some reason after I slammed the door, running around in the snow at 1 AM. Posted this before. Took my 2 babies to an in-home daycare run by a lovely woman. About 9 days in. The woman's teenage son was home when I picked up my kids. He gave me a super creepy vibe. Pulled the kids from the daycare and placed them elsewhere. Maybe 10 years later that kid murdered 2 people then killed his mom. When I was in middle school and around 14 years old I was returning home. I live like 5 minutes away from said school and I noticed there was a man following me. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his phone and he wore a cap so I wasn't able to see his face fully. Anyways he gave off this weird vibe. I reached my apartment building and the guy was still behind me. I know mostly everyone who lives in my neighborhood and I couldn't recall him. Last moment I decided I wasn't going to go inside the hallway. I turned around and went to a store where I waited for my mom to come. A few weeks after there was some news about an 11-year-old girl from my school who was ARP-ed in the building right behind mine 2 days after the incident. The guy they caught looked a lot like the guy who had followed me and given the time frame and the proximity there's a high chance that it was him. I stood up and had a quick Matrix-like wave, just like how the walls flex in the move. I turned to the closest person and asked for a ride to the emergency room. Honestly, it felt like a little head rush or lightheadedness that I've had 100 times before. If I would have brushed it off as such, I would be dead. My lungs were at 30% capacity as I was drowning from fluids and had absolutely no other symptoms than the brief lightheaded feeling. Also, I had been feeling a bit down and hadn't eaten. The more I analyzed the situation I have no idea why I asked a stranger for a ride to the hospital. First time was 3 weeks after getting my gallbladder out. I felt terrible. I still had a drain in my stomach. I called my sister and said I'm afraid I'll be dead tomorrow. Went to the emergency room and turns out the surgeon had nicked my liver and I was bleeding internally. It turned into a blood blister on my liver and if it popped I would have bled to death. Second time I had been feeling like someone was squeezing around my chest for months. I passed out one morning. Went to the hospital and they found a tumor between my heart and lungs. Turned out to be cancer. I literally thought you meant the surgeon stole your liver. I was so confused. My daughter was 1.5 years at the time. She had a cold. But bedtime went off without a hitch. I woke up in the middle of the night at night. Really uncomfortable and anxious. Something was off and I couldn't put my finger on it. I got up. Had a midnight snack. Tried to calm my nerves. I decided to check on my kids, who shared a room, before trying to go back to sleep. I get in there and immediately I hear a light sound coming from her crib, also wheezing. It was so quiet. There was no way to hear it outside of the room. I got her up and saw that her breathing was fast and labored. I took her to the hospital, where she ended up with an overnight stay, oxygen, and nebulizer treatments because her oxygen had dipped. She was diagnosed with reactive airway disease due to the cold, which triggered the asthma attack. Not me, but when my mum was a teenager on the 18th of November 1987. She was going to London to visit a friend. It was around 7:20 PM and she decided she was going to take a taxi instead of going by tube because it didn't feel right. King's Cross tube station. 10 minutes later the whole station caught on fire and 30 out of the 40 people died. If she had decided to take the tube she would likely have died. I had something like this one time in elementary school when we had a recess. It was pretty average and we left at the normal time, but it just felt very off to me. But because I was 8 and didn't have common sense yet, I brushed the feeling off. Turns out that there was literally a guy that had been scoping out a playground for kids to lure to him in a stereotypical large white van. Edit. Was hunting for early morels and king boletes last May up near Clallam. No luck. So went further over towards Hancock. About 2/3 RDS up a hillside I felt like I was being watched. I slowly realized that I couldn't hear any animals making noise. Hackles raised. I immediately started down the most direct path to my car. One trail above where I was parked I saw a partial juvenile male deer skeleton under a large conifer. As I double timed it past. I looked up and saw the rest of the bones and sinew slung up in the branches. Out came the knife and I slowed down, turning and scanning every few yards until I got into my car and booked it out of there. The next day 2 mountain bikers were attacked by a cougar and one was killed very near to the area I was hiking. I carry a handgun now for my mushroom hunts. Was at a farmer's market in downtown Chico, CA with my wife. I'm tall and white and my wife is Asian and vertically challenged. And over the crowd I saw 2 very rough looking gentlemen. One really tall and the other short with a swastika tattooed on his forehead like Charles Manson. Little tattooed man and I made eye contact from maybe 50 feet away and he gestured to his friend and then he pointed at me. I alerted my wife and told her that we were leaving immediately. She thought I was majorly overreacting and wanted to continue shopping. But I overruled her and we left. Maybe 6 months later we were watching America's Most Wanted and guess who showed up for double murder over meth in Oroville, CA. My 2 buddies. We still talk about that from time to time and it still gives me goosebumps 15 years later. Just yesterday I was getting ready to hop in my motorcycle and head to work. But I just felt off about doing it. I drive instead. I typically ride in the right-hand lane on this stretch of road where people drive really fast. I'm in no rush. Just riding for fun. In my car. The RV directly to my right is chugging along when the tire cover flies off the back of his car and land in the road. It may not sound like much. But on a bike that could have easily caused me to lose traction. And even swerve off to the right where a downward sloping stretch of grass and a metal fence would have greeted me. I was 6 years old and staying at a lodge with my family. My parents were staying in one room and I was in the other room with my 3 siblings. Everyone else was asleep but I was lying in bed wide awake and terrified. I don't remember hearing anything. Just being scared shitless. I got out of bed and pounded on my parents' door so hard my fists hurt. I'll never forget how scared I was. My parents had me and my siblings sleep in their room that night and we left early the next day. I didn't find out till years later when I asked about it. That they had been a ladder up against my window and the screen was cut open. One day about 10 years ago, I skipped my college classes for no particular reason and went about doing various things. For some reason. I can't remember. I was on the side of town my boyfriend's mom lived on. I just had the worst uneasy feeling. Like the air was stale and too still. So I drove to her house. When I walked to the front door, it was open and there was a bucket of something black on the porch. I found his mom standing in the bedroom freaking out and his older brother was on the bed. I take one look at the brother and just now he is dying. We carried him to my car and drove to the closest urgent care. They told us when we got there he had about 10 minutes to live if we couldn't get him to the hospital. Luckily the hospital was close by and they had an ambulance ready. Turns out he was an undiagnosed, late blooming type 1 diabetic and a high functioning drug addict. I never ignore my gut now. Talking to my best friend's boyfriend gave me a lizard brain reaction that made me feel very afraid. I refused to hang out with him because I felt like there was something off. Later he told my best friend that he wanted to kill her and then himself with a knife. They have stayed together for 4 years since then. I was in the food court of the eating center in Toronto shoveling down my meal before heading to the airport to fly home. I have anxiety and always like to get places super early just for my own comfort. And was running a bit late for my liking. I finally decided to throw out the last few bites of my food and run to the subway to get to the airport. 18 minutes after I left was when that mass shooting happened in the food court of that mall. First party I went to. A Pasa Pasa Caribbean party. I felt something was off about the energy and the fact that some guys looked like they were gonna get busy, so I left. As I leave the building I hear gunshots and cops come. Second party is in an abandoned flimsy building. The DJ told us plenty times to stop jumping in the middle of the floor. Obviously since we were young. No one cared. I did. I left and my friend told me the next day how the floor caved in and a lot of people got injured. Third party. Another passer. These girls start throwing bottles at each other and another guy brought in drugs. I got out of there and not 2 minutes later a bunch of cops come. These are only from parties I've been to. No one invite this guy anywhere. Was hiking by myself. Real smart. I get this feeling that something wasn't right. But I normally act on that feeling. That day however, I ignored it. Went to a lookout. Turned around and headed back. About the same place as I got the feeling I noticed cougar tracks cross mine in the snow. They followed mine for a few meters and then went to a bit of shrub that overlooked both where I was now and the lookout. I immediately left and avoided going anywhere near something that would give a cougar cover. Occasionally behind me I would notice a small rustle in the bushes and trees or some snow falling off a disturbed branch. I live in Southern California and growing up living by the beach I would go surfing a lot. Almost every day during the summer with my buddies. One day I wanted to go but no one else could go, so I decided it was fine and I would go by myself. Not a huge deal, I've gone surfing alone in the past and there are always other people in the lineup to hang around. Anyway, I get to the beach and when I paddle out I noticed there wasn't anyone out yet. More waves for me, I thought. But after a while something just felt off. I don't really know how to explain it, but it was a very eerie feeling, as if I was being watched. I don't think I've ever felt such an acute feeling like that before or since then, but I just listened to my gut feeling and paddled in and went home. The next morning a swimmer died at that exact beach from a great white shark attack. I haven't been surfing since and that was 10 years ago. Halloween several years ago I was out late trick-or-treating with my friends. All was good and well until we got into the really rich neighborhood in which they would give you the good candy. Sounds awesome, right? Wrong. Semicolon. We went through the blocks getting full-sized candy bars and having a blast when we reached a regular house, decorations and all. We knocked and did our usual chant and a woman greeted us at the door. She told us that if we wanted candy we would have to go into the candy room upstairs. I immediately felt awkward and not good because I noticed the stench from the house and being the oldest in our group, no parents, told everyone to dip. We ran and never returned. Fast forward 2 weeks and on the news police arrested a couple for trying to abduct kids. When their faces popped up on screen I recognized the woman and told my parents. From then on they had to come trick-or-treating. Semicolon. Edit. Put a piece of furniture up for sale on Craigslist. Nothing fancy or crazy expensive. Just a used bike. Guy emailed and said I got $140 for it today. And I got the thing new for $160. So I was psyched. Said, okay. And gave him a general address, not exact. Didn't hear from him all day. Which isn't weird with Craigslist. But something felt weird, so I googled his name from his email, and it turns out he's been arrested several times for home burglary and robbery. Blocked him and gave the bike to friend for free. The strangest part of this story is categorizing a bike as furniture.